I work for a big company and I can earn enough for both of us, so don't worry, Patrick said during our engagement, and his words seemed golden to me, full of hope and hopeful light. We planned a future together full of happiness and comfort. However, as soon as we got married, the atmosphere changed. Patrick began to change, and I noticed how his smile, which had once sincerely warmed me, became just a mask hiding his displeasure. He spent more and more time with Harry, his son from his first marriage, and their teasing together sometimes struck a chord with me. "Mom, you're back in bed. Where's my sandwich?" he would ask with a frown, entering the bedroom as if I were his servant and not the woman he loved. My heart ached with resentment when I heard their conversations full of contempt. Every day his control over our finances became more and more unbearable. "Why can't you just enjoy the fact that I provide for us?" he would say when I tried to suggest ideas for the family budget. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I was tired and disappointed, and the help I had hoped to receive turned into constant mocking neglect. The moment I decided to tell Patrick that I wanted to get a divorce, I was overwhelmed with a sense of liberation. I packed my things and left the house, feeling like the weight I was carrying on my shoulders had finally become lighter. Later, while walking along familiar streets, I accidentally bumped into Harry. "Hey, I heard you're getting divorced now," he said with a slight surprise, but there was not a drop of sympathy in his voice. "You must be mistaking me for someone else," he added with a grin, as if he didn't realize what a storm he had caused with his inappropriate comment. I knew he didn't understand the seriousness of the situation, but at that moment I felt funny. Poor guy who doesn't know the truth, I thought, and laughter suddenly burst out of my chest. I couldn't wait for him to find out what life was really like with Patrick. I, Jacqueline, a 53-year-old housewife, married Patrick 7 years ago. He seemed like the perfect guy to me when we met at a mutual friend's party. His gaiety and friendliness attracted me, and soon he himself asked if we could meet alone. I agreed, feeling a slight sadness of parting, and could not imagine that this decision would be a turning point in my life. Gradually, when our meetings began, he told me about his son Harry, who was then in the 5th grade. We had dinner together several times, and it seemed to me that this young boy had inherited his father's intelligence and charm. A year later, when Patrick asked me to stay at home and not work, full of hope, gladly accepted his offer. I thought that our path led to a happy family life, but less than 6 months later I felt hopelessly lonely and forgotten. In those days, when Patrick and Harry laughed at everything I did and instead of supporting me, blamed me for my shortcomings, I knew that something had gone wrong. I started doing housework hoping it would bring us closer, but in the end their taunts only increased my isolation. They did not notice my efforts and sacrifices, and even when I, exhausted after long days, asked for help, their reactions only increased my pain. When I felt bad after volunteering at the park, I sincerely tried to explain to Harry why I couldn't make his sandwich. "I'm sorry, Harry, I couldn't make your sandwich. Here's some money to buy it at the store," I said, hoping that at least I could take care of him. But his reply was full of reproach. "You don't even know how to cook, Mom." Patrick, passing by, just grinned, adding fuel to the fire of my worries. "Since you missed the sandwich tonight, dinner must be very tasty," Patrick said with a barely noticeable mockery in his voice, sitting down at the table. "Ah, then I'll be looking forward to it," Harry chimed in, his voice echoing his father's intonation, in which there was neither respect nor even a hint of sympathy. As if by agreement, they both continued, "Well, you must have enough time to cook dinner, right? You haven't slept all day, right?" Harry chuckled, as if mocking not only me, but all my helplessness. The chuckles rang through the room like the rattling of chains holding me in this incessant struggle. Each of their comments hit my wounded heart. As if they didn't realize how bad I was. Or, more likely, they just didn't care. They both knew that I was in a painful state and yet they didn't stop their barbs. Those words were like needles digging into my mind. Patrick, with his arrogant gaze, believed that all these were trifles, that my role in the house was only to silently perform my duties, as if I were part of the furniture. Dinner, cleaning, taking care of the house, all this, in his eyes, was a duty that I had to fulfill unconditionally. I sighed heavily. Living with him was becoming unbearable. Patrick, as the head of a department in a large company, received a high salary, but the money he allocated for our daily expenses was ridiculously low. "This is my salary," he once said when I tried to discuss the budget. "Why should my wife control her?" His voice was so firm then that, not wanting to get into an argument, I just nodded silently, naively believing that it didn't matter much. Isn't it just important that the money will be spent on the needs of the family? But it soon became clear that his financial management was not fair at all. Patrick spent the money as he pleased, justifying his expenses by saying that they were related to his work. "This is a business expense, dear. Drinking with colleagues is important," he said with complete seriousness, buying expensive clothes, watches, visiting restaurants. However, when it came to me, his generosity evaporated like morning mist. He made a sour face even when I decided to buy something small, like cheap snacks for home. "You're a housewife, why do you need money for small things?" he said one day, and I felt the ground under my feet become shaky. Every purchase became a humiliating ritual for me. I had to ask his permission for even the simplest things. One day I asked to buy a pair of jeans because my old ones were worn out and I wanted something warm for the winter. Patrick, without hesitation, said, "Okay, but buy them at a cheap store." And it's always been that way. Every time I tried to improve my health or appearance, I was greeted with the words that it was a waste of money. I wanted to go to the hairdresser at least once every 3 months to maintain my hairstyle, but he grinned. "Why do you need to be fashionable? You have long hair, you can cut it once every 7 months." His dismissive attitude was destroying my last vestiges of self-confidence. He allowed me only the cheapest cosmetics from the pharmacy, although my sensitive skin could not tolerate such products. I asked for the opportunity to buy something better, but he didn't care. The money he allocated for household needs was so meager that I could barely balance our diet. When I complained, he said complacently, "Here, on TV they showed a family who saved so that they lived on the same money. They had a relative, a farmer, who supplied them with vegetables." There was not a shadow of concern in his words about the real life we were leading. The most painful moment for me was what Patrick did when my father died. Dad, who had been ill for a long time, finally left this world, and on the day when it was necessary to send a wreath to the funeral, Patrick said with furrowed brows, "We don't need to send a wreath, right? This is the responsibility of the general manager. Use your savings." His indifference at that moment tore me apart. Holding back tears, I replied, "I wasn't going to ask you to do that. This is my funeral, my tears." But the worst was yet to come. Patrick and Harry insisted that they didn't want to go to the funeral because it would disrupt their plans for the long weekend. Harry even added that he wanted to play a new video game. I felt my love for Patrick and Harry slowly but surely disappear, melting away like wax on candles, leaving only a pile of cold wax and barely noticeable smoke. Every comment they made, every mocking look, added another wound to my already broken heart. It seemed that even in their absence, a cold emptiness remained in the house, as if the spirit of contempt and dislike permeated the walls and the air. Patrick always looked immaculate, his stylish suits, impeccable hairstyle, expensive watch on his wrist. He seemed to be the epitome of success, a man that many women could dream of. And Harry, his miniature copy, is a young and ambitious student at a prestigious university, outwardly a handsome and successful son, causing the envy of neighbors. Their outward well-being concealed a cold cruelty and contempt that manifested itself only behind the closed doors of our house. Where I, who had become more of a servant to them than a wife and mother, was forced to fulfill any of their whims with the pitiful crumbs that were allocated to me for the household. They rarely returned home immediately after work or school. Instead, I was left alone, waiting for them to return, terrified of what new claims and ridicule they would come with. They often returned with the smell of women's lipstick and perfume, which, however, no longer aroused jealousy in me. I had long ceased to feel anything but disgust for them. And despite all this, their expectations of me only increased. They demanded that I cook delicious dishes for them, although they gave me a meager amount of money for groceries. When I served chicken or pork on the table, Patrick and Harry met it with contemptuous glances. Don't you want to please your husband with a proper meal after work? What if I get sick from your cheap dishes? Do you even know how to cook? Their words were like blows, destroying my last strength every time. When I did try to cook something, they didn't hide their disappointment, often leaving the food untouched without even tasting it. But if I didn't cook, they immediately shouted, accusing me of idleness. The irony was that I was the one who had to finish those leftovers the next day, because I had to save on everything, including food for myself. I've often wondered, who do I keep doing this for anyway? My existence has lost all meaning. The only time I felt like I could really make a difference was the day Patrick was diagnosed with prediabetes and Harry started gaining weight rapidly. It was inevitable, given their habits: constant snacking on the go, fast food meals, endless nights with instant noodles. But instead of accepting their responsibility, they turned their anger on me. What kind of wife lets her husband and son get sick? You're useless, Patrick kept saying, and Harry, chuckling, added, we will file for divorce. We don't need a useless person like you. I didn't argue this time. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I just said, yes, we're getting divorced. They both froze, surprised by my willingness to make this decision. Are you sure? You're unemployed, you've been living off me all these years. How will you survive now? Patrick looked at me with a sneer, but there was a note of alarm in his voice. I replied with restraint, don't worry about me. I will send the divorce papers and you will sign them. My calmness confused them. Patrick tried to make a last stand. You will regret divorcing a handsome, well-paid husband like me. Kind, caring, who allowed you to be a housewife and not worry about money. 3 meals a day, a nap, where will you find such luxury? Harry chimed in, chuckling, that's right, you lived in luxury, like in a fairy tale. Now there's a fight waiting for you. You'll go back to your parents, straight to poverty. Their words no longer hurt. I was free. I silently packed my things, not wanting to continue this conversation. Patrick and Harry didn't let up, discussing behind my back how I, poor, would survive now. Their complacency and confidence that they were the pinnacle of this world was amazing. Patrick, with his overestimation of his own importance, and Harry, whose life has not yet had time to face reality. You're just going to go back to your mom in retirement, Patrick continued. Say hello to her for me. We will be receiving poverty benefits with you soon, Harry added, laughing. I knew it was useless to argue with them. In their world, everything was divided into success and defeat, and for them I was the loser. But when I packed my last things and closed my suitcase, I knew that I would win what is really important: freedom and dignity. When I got home, I told my mom everything. She was sitting in an armchair by the window, quietly looking into the distance and listening to me with attention, without interrupting. When I finished, she sighed heavily and said in a soft but excited voice, you know, at the funeral, when I saw Patrick and Harry, something seemed strange to me. I felt that something was going wrong, but I did not interfere. I thought it was wrong to meddle in your family affairs. I was too busy taking care of your father in the last days of his life. Listening to her words, I realized how much she understood, but she just didn't want to burden me anymore. I apologized. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I'm sorry for barging into your life with these problems, Mom. But she just shook her head and replied with a smile, don't worry, dear. I was lonely without you. Why don't you stay here longer? I thanked her for her concern, but firmly said that as soon as I start working, I plan to find my apartment. It was important for me not to become too dependent on my mom. Living next to her, visiting her, it seemed to me the right balance. Mom nodded approvingly, although I could see a slight worry in her eyes. She knew how difficult it would be to start a new life after everything that had happened. Patrick and Harry made fun of me for being supposedly unemployed, but they didn't even realize that all this time I was running my blog dedicated to budget recipes that I created and published myself. My culinary creativity suddenly became popular, and soon I boldly launched a full-fledged website. Readers began to actively subscribe, share my recipes, and leave positive comments. It gave me strength and confidence. After some time, the editor of a large publishing house approached me with a proposal to publish a cookbook. This activity fascinated me so much that I practically did not think about divorce. The days flew by quickly, filled with work, cooking, and new ideas for the site. My life finally started to make sense, and I felt free like never before. One day my phone rang. I was just stirring the ingredients in the pan when I saw an old friend calling. When I picked up the phone, I heard his voice. "Hi, how are you? Listen, I just found out about your divorce proceedings. Are you all right? Patrick mentioned something about it the other day." I sighed heavily, knowing that it didn't bode well. "Yes, it has to do with the way she and Harry insulted me all the time," I replied calmly. "Oh, I thought it was something insignificant," Patrick said with relief in his voice when he called later. "You know I didn't cheat on you or anything. Why complicate all this? You write down everything that happens in your diary, right? I think you have the recordings." I took a pause and coldly replied, "Yes, I have everything written down. I recorded every day in my diary. You can try to refute it if you want." There was a familiar mockery in Patrick's voice. "You're always so stingy. Do you think you can use this against me in court? Keep trying." His words only made me smile a little. I finished cooking and headed to the detective agency I hired to find out Patrick's background. It soon became clear that he had been dating a work colleague for a long time. The next day, I sent joint photos and an investigation report to his company. His novel soon became public. Patrick called me again a few days later, and this time his voice sounded worried. "Did you spread this at work? My manager found out, and now I'm in trouble." I was fired. "How could you do that?" I replied indifferently, "She's your boss's daughter, isn't she? You know yourself that such companies have strict rules." Patrick was furious, but there was only mockery in my voice. "Well, don't worry, you have savings. Live comfortably with Harry, as always." However, he did not lose his head and continued. "Harry moved into the hostel this spring because it became difficult to get to work. I paid for his dorm and apartment on credit in advance. My savings are almost depleted." His voice was shaking, but I didn't care. When he started talking about the property again, demanding half the cost of the apartment as a divorce settlement, I just hung up, not wanting to hear his complaints anymore. Shortly after that, I met Harry by chance in the city when I was returning from shopping. He was dressed as brightly as ever, his clothes attracted attention, and his face was covered with piercings. Even at a great distance, he stood out from the crowd with his defiant hairstyle, as if he was deliberately trying to be noticeable. When Harry saw me, he raised his hand in a lazy greeting and grinned. "Hey, I heard you're on state aid now." His words sounded mocking, as if he was trying to prick me, test my nerves. I squinted, trying to figure out what he was talking about, and answered coldly, "Who do you take me for?" Harry, as if expecting my question, only grinned wider. "Don't pretend. Where else would an unemployed old lady like you live? If you had just followed me and Dad, you would still be living a comfortable life." His words were so humiliating that I felt rage flare up inside me. But I held back, even though it wasn't easy. Taking a breath, I answered, "Receiving state aid is a citizen's right. Any of us may need it in case of illness or accident. It's wrong to look down on it." But Harry just chuckled. "So you're saying you have it too?" His eyes were shining, as if he was pleased with his attempt to embarrass me. He raised his hand, pointing his finger directly at me, as if at someone below him in status. "Listen, you and I are separated. So don't come crying to me for money, remember that." I opened my mouth to reply, but Harry abruptly turned and disappeared into the crowd, his bright clothes flashing in the distance. I lowered my head, feeling the eyes of passers-by on me, and couldn't help but laugh. It was so absurd that it made me laugh. He didn't even realize how much he was wrong. Poor thing, Harry. He didn't know anything, and I wondered what his reaction would be when the truth finally surfaced. A few days later, in the early morning, when I just woke up, my phone literally exploded from the number of missed calls. They were all from Harry. I reluctantly called back, knowing that nothing good would come of this conversation. Harry was shouting into the phone, his voice full of rage. "You tricked me, you old witch. What is this story about inheritance? I heard from my cousin that you got 3 high-rise apartments from your grandfather. You've been living a carefree life and hiding it from us, and now you want to get a divorce? This is cowardice." I calmly listened to his outburst and calmly replied, "This is my personal property. Why should I share it? It was an inheritance that I received after the divorce, and it has nothing to do with you." Harry, not wanting to calm down, continued to shout, "You should have shared the property with Dad. Why did you hide it?" I calmly explained, "The apartments became mine by will, and I postponed the inheritance process until the divorce, because I did not want to share with Patrick. He didn't know anything about it, and now everything belongs to me." On the other end of the line, Harry literally shuddered with rage. "A rich woman like you gets government help. I will inform the authorities right now." I just chuckled in response, "Don't be shy. It's not me, it's Patrick getting help." The silence on the phone lasted for several seconds, as if Harry couldn't believe his ears. Finally, he said in a weak voice, "What? Is Dad getting help? You're lying." I heard his breathing become uneven. "Yes, Harry," I continued, as if explaining something to a child. "Patrick squandered all his money by taking on large debts. After his affair was discovered and he was fired from his job, his income stopped. Did you really not know? Dad is too proud to tell you about it." Harry paused, shocked by what he had heard, and finally asked, "So he's really on state aid?" His voice sounded muffled, as if this discovery had knocked him down. "According to the relatives," I continued, not giving him the opportunity to attack me again, "he has already asked for money to rent an apartment. If he's facing eviction, why don't you contact him?" There was a long pause on the other side of the line. Then Harry, breaking into a scream, said, "How can you be so heartless? Dad always took care of you, and you're not going to repay him? You have money, you have to help him." I coldly stated, "Since we got married, I have only unpleasant memories. I don't feel like I owe him anything." Harry lowered his eyes in embarrassment, avoiding a direct answer to my question. "Why don't you help your father yourself? After all, you work, albeit part-time," I continued, feeling a growing irritation. Harry grimaced and muttered, "Well, I don't have any savings. My salary goes to hanging out with friends and all that." I grinned at his apparent attempt to evade responsibility. "You live quite generously for a student. Spending money on clubs, borrowing money for it, is not the smartest idea, Harry." Displeasure flashed in his eyes, but he quickly shifted his gaze to the side, trying to preserve at least the remnants of his dignity. "How do you know?" "What is it?" he asked reproachfully, as if I had betrayed some terrible secret to him. "The other day in town, I saw you across the street," I began, not hiding the sarcasm in my voice. "After we broke up, you met a girl at a club, and then went to the company store, and even used my credit card to pay for purchases. Don't you think that's too much?" Harry stammered in confusion, "It's not fair. You have 3 multi-story apartments from your grandfather's inheritance. Why can't Dad or I get our share? This is discrimination." Yes, I shook my head, feeling that the conversation was coming to a dead end. "The credit score will be coming soon. Make sure you pay it on time." Before Harry could reply, I hit the end call button and dropped the phone on the couch with a soft sigh of relief. Several months had passed, and I had almost forgotten about our conversation, when one day, quite unexpectedly, the doorbell of my parents' house began to ring without interruption. I opened the door and saw Patrick and Harry. They looked completely different than I remembered them. Previously, they were always well-groomed and stylish. Now they stood in front of me in rumpled clothes, with tired faces and dull eyes, but despite their pathetic appearance, they still had enough energy for sarcasm. Patrick looked around the living room and grinned, the same old house. Why not sell one of these high-rise apartments and rebuild this place? Do something good for Mom, who, poor thing, has to live on her pension. I nodded slowly, holding back the anger that surged. This is Dad's house, and we like it here. But more importantly, when are you two planning on paying me back? The deadline has expired long ago. Patrick arrogantly raised his chin and replied, Jacqueline, I'll forgive you now. You've launched a cooking website, right? You're doing well, and I'll even let you work. Come back to me, be a grateful wife and a faithful mother. We're going to be a family again. Isn't that important? His voice was full of feigned generosity, as if he was doing me a favor. I stood there in shock, speechless for a moment. But soon anger came over me. Are you making fun of me? How much longer are you going to humiliate me and lead me by the nose? You treated me like a servant, insulted me, didn't give me money, and now you want me to come back just because you found out about my inheritance? No, it's not going to happen. Harry tried to support Patrick, but sounded uncertain. You're just greedy. Knowing that we are in trouble, you demand money. Is that fair? Fair enough. I laughed bitterly. I'm not greedy. You both abandoned me, insulted and rejected me, and now that you know that I have money, you suddenly remember that I exist. Patrick, unable to stand my answer, exploded. You were a poor woman not long ago, and now you're turning up your nose. At that moment, in the midst of our quarrel, Mom came into the house with her shopping. When Patrick and Harry saw her, they instantly changed, their faces became softer, and they began to butter her up. Please lend us some money. We will definitely return it. And isn't it fair that only Jacqueline got her grandfather's inheritance? Give us at least one of the apartments. Harry added plaintively, Hi, Grandma, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. Please talk to Mom, persuade her to marry Dad again. Mom, hearing their words, was confused at first, and then her expression changed dramatically, and she looked at them suspiciously. Mom slowly put her shopping bag on the floor and, taking a deep breath, turned to Patrick and Harry. There was an expression on her face that I didn't see often, a mixture of anger and disappointment. So you're both shameless, she said with cold determination, staring at them intently. Patrick and Harry hesitated, not knowing how to react to her harsh tone. Mom rarely raised her voice, and seeing her so firm and unyielding was a surprise to them. I'm telling you that you should be at least a little ashamed. Suddenly she screamed, throwing off all restraint at once. Patrick and Harry looked at each other, confused and confused. They clearly did not expect such a violent reaction. Mom had never scolded them so harshly before. I've heard all about the divorce from Jacqueline. I can't believe you had the audacity to come here with such demands, my mother continued, calmer now, but with the same unyielding firmness in her voice. No, Jacqueline is exaggerating everything, Patrick said hastily, trying to justify himself. Yes, Grandma, Harry chimed in, as if hoping that familiarity would help him soften her mood. Mom got it all wrong. But Mom didn't hesitate to cut him off, looking sternly at both of them. I remember how you both behaved at my husband's funeral, her voice was filled with bitterness. And now you dare to come here and ask for his inheritance? Patrick and Harry fell silent, stunned. Mom came to the front door, gesturing for them to leave. You are strangers to us now, she said firmly. Don't come here anymore. If you dare to show up again, I'll call the police. She threw their shoes over the threshold, forcing them to leave in their socks, and immediately locked the door behind them. I stood on the sidelines, amazed at the determination with which she handled this situation. Mom was always so caring and gentle, but at this moment her resilience showed how much she protects me. After that, Patrick tried to avoid paying his debts for a while, but after receiving advice from his lawyer that the lawsuit would have cost him much more, he finally transferred the money to my account. Although his career collapsed after he was fired and he could not find a new job, his relatives intervened to pay off his debts. They repeatedly visited my parents' house, apologized and tried to smooth over the situation. Patrick, unable to cope with the shame and despair, eventually returned to his native village, pretending to help the family in agriculture. However, the story of our divorce quickly spread around the neighborhood, and the villagers did not miss the opportunity to make fun of him. Now he has become the object of ridicule and sarcastic remarks. Here is thrifty Uncle Patrick. Even with a diploma from a good university and a job in a large company, he was left with nothing, and his wife left him because he was too arrogant. Patrick was humiliated, but that didn't stop him from sending me intrusive messages asking me to help save his face. I couldn't take it anymore and deleted his contact. His mistress, who had seemed so devoted to him before, disappeared as soon as the money ran out. I found her with the help of a detective and made sure she paid all the bail in the divorce case. As for Harry, he was forced to refund the money he used from my credit card without permission. Despite his bright future, studying at a prestigious university and the opportunity to become successful like his father, Harry began to skip classes, plunging into a fun life and fun, which eventually led to his expulsion. His friends and girlfriends gradually pulled away from him, unable to stand his arrogance and continuous sarcastic comments. There was a serious quarrel between him and Patrick. Harry was screaming furiously, "You're my father, but you're not even helping me pay off my debts." Their conflict had escalated into something more. Now they weren't even talking to each other. Harry lived alone in a small apartment, earning some money from part-time jobs. The days when he carelessly bought everything he wanted and mocked others were long gone. It was a kind of relief for me. My cooking site continued to flourish, and I signed a contract to release a new book. I moved to the top floor of one of the multi-story apartments that I inherited from my father. My mother, who is already 75 years old, is still healthy and full of energy, and the high-rise is located not far from our family home, which is very convenient. If she needs something, I can always be there. In the near future, I plan to arrange a surprise trip for Mom to the hot springs in honor of her birthday. Even if my marriage didn't work out, but I want to maintain a warm relationship with my mother, because she has always been a support for me.